Hi, it's Paul Murphy here, and today it's almost 12 months since I moved to the United States, and I thought a fitting way to celebrate that would be by animating a map of the flight path that I took from Sydney to New York. You'll notice that we aren't working with a flat map here, it's actually like a rotating globe. And then there's also this secret trick here, something that I don't think I've seen done before in After Effects, and that is this 3D text that's floating outside of the globe. Now there's a few different things going on here and a few different skill levels as well, so I thought I'd break this tutorial up into sections in case you wanted to skip past the parts that you already know. But the first thing we need to do is set up a project, so let's jump straight into that. We need to create a new comp. I'm going to call this globe. We want the dimensions to be 1920 by 1080. The frame rate is 23.976 and the duration is 7 seconds. Now I've already imported a map of the world into my project. This is something that I've downloaded off Shutterstock. The reason I've used this particular map is because it's quite high resolution. You can see that there's a lot of detail in there, and that's going to really help us out when we need to zoom in and out of our map. So let's drag the map into our comp. We want to pre-compose the map by selecting Layer, Pre-compose. We'll call the map Map Flat. And we want to make sure that Leave All Attributes in Globe is checked. Now we'll double click that map to open up the pre-comp. And the first thing I notice is that the United States is actually on the wrong side of Australia. So I'm just going to click the layer and drag it across. And then using the Reptile effect, I'll actually extend out the right side of the map. And I just want to make sure that Australia and the United States are kind of in the center of my map. So I'm going to turn on my title safe guides and just move the map across until they're kind of in the center. So that's a good starting point. Now we need to animate our flight path. What I'm going to do is add a new shape layer to our comp by selecting Layer, New Shape Layer. I'll rename this Flight Path. And then I'll go and select the pen tool. And my geography is not very good on this, but I think that Sydney is somewhere around about here. And I'm just going to click and drag until I get my Bezier curves. And then I'll just click and do the same thing over here where I think New York is. And now we have a nice curved flight path drawn across our map. I'm just going to zoom into that a bit so I can see it a bit better. Probably do need to adjust Sydney just a little bit. Okay, so to turn this into a dashed line, I'm just going to open up the options on my shape layer. And when I get down to stroke, you see I've got the option to add dashes. So I'm just going to click the plus button here. And by adjusting the dash value, we actually change the length of the dash. Now we actually want to animate this path so that it draws on from Sydney all the way through to New York. And to do that, I'm going to use a special mode that only comes with shape paths, which is called Trim Paths. And just by twirling down the options on Trim Paths, I can add a keyframe for the end setting here. And I'm going to set this to 0. And then I'm going to jump forward 6 seconds in time and change the value to 100. And that just lets us animate on our path from Sydney through to New York. As well as that, I actually want this to ease out and ease in when it animates. So I'm going to just lasso both of my keyframes here and select Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. So now that we've drawn our flight path, we need to bring the plane into our comp. I have one already imported. It's an Illustrator file. I'm just going to drag this into my comp. And the secret to the Indiana Jones effect that we've got here is that we can actually take the geometry of this curved line that we've drawn and paste it onto our plane as time keyframes. So to do that, what we'll do is twirl down our flight path till we get to the path option, and this is where all the information about the curved path that we've drawn is stored. And I'm just going to select Edit, Copy, and then go to my plane and press P to bring up my position values. Make sure your playhead is moved to the very start of your comp, And just by selecting position, I'm going to go back to Edit, Paste, and you can see it's actually pasted 2 keyframes in my comp there. And if I drag my playhead across, it actually now moves across that curved line that we've drawn. This second keyframe is in the wrong place though, so I'm just going to jump forward to 6 seconds, which is where our animated flight path ends, and just select this second keyframe and drag it to 6 seconds. So now those 2 things should move in time with each other, only they don't quite. You can see that the path is actually going over the line here. That's because we haven't added an easy ease to these keyframes. So again, I'll just lasso those keyframes and select Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. And now the 2 things should move perfectly in sync with each other. Just a few more changes we need to make to this before we move on. For one thing, at the moment our aeroplane is the size of Australia. So I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit. And pressing S, I'm going to bring up my scale options and just scale down our plane until it's about the right size. Now, as well as this, I don't actually want my plane to just be in the one upright position as it moves. I actually want it to change its rotation as it moves across the path. So I'm going to select Layer, Transform, Auto Orient, and I want to orient the plane along the path that it's following. I'll just zoom in and adjust the overall rotation of the plane. And now that plane should adjust its trajectory as it moves across the path. Just one more thing before we wrap up our flight path animation here. I'm just going to zoom into the plane. And I just want to add a drop shadow so that the plane looks like it's off the ground a little bit. There, that looks pretty good. Okay, so that's it for our flight path animation. Now it's time to move on to the next section, which is turning this flat map into a rotating globe. So now we're back inside our globe comp. We've animated our flight path and we want to turn this map into a globe. Now, there are several different ways we could do this. We could move into something like Cinema 4D Lite and start working in 3D space. Or we could download any number of plugins that could create that 3D effect. But certainly moving to something like a 3D program kind of feels like we're hitting a nail with a sledgehammer in this case. So let's keep things really simple. Let's use an effect that's been in After Effects for a long time, and that is CC Sphere. And within less than a second, we've already turned our map into a globe. I'm just going to adjust the radius and the ambience so we can see things a little bit better. And if I move my playhead along here, you can see that our animation has come through and has been mapped to this 3D space. Now, I do have a slight problem with this effect now that we've applied it, and that is that the curvature of the Earth seems really extreme, and I'd like to actually scale things back a bit. So I'm just going to lock my comp viewer and then double-click Map Animation so that I'm actually inside that pre-comp. And on Map Flat, I'm going to press S to bring up my scale options. Make sure that I'm looking at my globe comp at the moment. So I'm actually looking at my globe comp, but I'm adjusting the scale for Map Flat. And I'm going to just adjust the scale just until I can see both Australia and the United States within this one view. So just to show you what I've actually done there, if I turn off this lock here, you can see I've just scaled down the globe within this comp. I'll go back to my globe comp, and now it's actually time to animate the rotation of the globe. And we can do that using 3 settings within our CC Sphere effect. If I just twirl down rotation, I'm going to turn on keyframes for my X rotation, my Y rotation, and also for my radius. I'm just going to press the U key to bring up those keyframes on my timeline. And the first thing I need to do is zoom in on Australia. Now I'm going to move to the very end of my comp, And I've already got my keyframes turned on. I'm going to just zoom out so I can see what I'm looking at and move over to New York. So you can see that we've got our animation from Sydney to New York. I'm just going to select all of these keyframes and select Animation Keyframe Assistant Easy Ease, just so we ease out and ease into those two locations. And I just want to add one more keyframe, just somewhere in between these two. I'd actually like to zoom out a bit. So I'm going to go to my radius and zoom out. And also just move the plane back to the center of the screen. Now let's have a look at how that looks. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. We've taken a fairly simple effect and made it a little bit more interesting. But I do think we could take things a little bit further and add some text to this animation. There are a number of different ways to do this, and the one that comes to mind quite quickly is, why don't we just go back into our original map and add in the text there? And definitely if this was a really quick job, we could go in and do that. My only problem with it is if I go to New York and move down into our original map here, and I type in New York, let's zoom out a bit here. Now that looks really nice there, but if I go all the way back to my globe map, you'll see that it's got this curve going on in the text. And maybe you like that effect, but I think that we can make things a little bit more interesting by actually having that text float outside the globe. So I'm just going to go back to that original animation and delete, and go back to our globe comp. Now the problem with CC Sphere is that it's a 2D effect. There's no actual 3D geometry associated with it. So in this case, we're actually going to have to generate that 3D geometry ourselves. And we're going to do that by using the camera tracker in After Effects. So I'm just going to double click my map animation, and I'm going to select Layer, New Solid, and I'm going to add a black solid here. Make sure it's the comp size and click OK. And then I'm going to duplicate that solid and call it Grid. I'll go over to the Effects and Presets and select our Grid effect and drag it onto the top layer. I want to change Size From to Width Slider, and I'll change the width to 150, and I'll change the border to 15. Now if we go back into our globe comp, you can see that we've actually got a 3D grid that's going to help the camera tracker identify the 3D coordinates of this globe. So now what we need to do is pre-compose this layer. I promise it will be the last time we pre-compose anything in this tutorial. I'm going to select Map Animation, Layer, Pre-compose. This time we actually want to move all attributes into the new composition, and I'm just going to name this Map Tracker and click OK. And now I'm going to select Animation Track Camera, and it just starts analyzing in the background. There is one extra thing I need to do here. I need to twirl down Advanced and make sure I've checked Detailed Analysis. This does mean, however, it's going to be a long process, probably about 2 to 3 minutes for this animation, but thanks to the magic of editing, we're already done. And look at this, we actually have 3D coordinates for this entire animation here. I'm just going to open up my map animation comp and turn off the black solid that we had and go back into our globe. And the first thing I notice moving my mouse around is that my target size on my camera tracker is really big. That's that big red circle that we're seeing there. So I'm actually going to drop my target size down to 2% so that it's a little bit more manageable to work with. And then I'm going to select, just by clicking and lassoing these points there, where Sydney is. And I'll right click and select Set Ground Plane and Origin. And that just means that all of the geometry, the position and scale data will originate from this point here. And now I need to set up all of the positions for my text in this comp. And whenever I'm working with trackers, whether they're 2D trackers or 3D trackers, I always like to work with nulls rather than assigning that 3D data directly to a text layer. I just find it's a little bit easier and a little bit more workable to keep everything separate that way. So I'm going to right click and select Create Null and Camera. And I'm going to call this null Sydney Tracker. And then I'll scroll all the way across to New York, make sure my map tracker is selected and the camera tracker effect is selected. And then I'll just lasso some more of these points and create a null and call it New York Tracker. And then I'll go to the middle of the Pacific Ocean and do the same thing for the north and south of the Pacific Ocean. And now I'll move back to the start of my comp and start adding in the text. I don't need the grid anymore because I have my null object to work with. So I'll just turn off grid in map animation and go back to globe. So I'm just going to add some text here and type in Sydney. Probably just need to scale it up. And then I can just parent that text to the Sydney tracker. Make sure that it is 3D. And then I just set all the values for Sydney to 0. And then just scale this down as well. I also want the text to be floating above the globe a bit, so I'm actually going to set the Z value to -25. And then I'll cover up Tasmania. And then I'll just move all the way over to New York and do the same thing. I can just duplicate my text, parent it to the New York tracker, set the position keyframes to 0 and -25 for the Z value, and also just need to make sure that my rotation values are set to 0 as well. And then just change the text to New York. And I might need to just fine-tune the position of this text as well. And then finally move over to the Pacific Ocean. I'll duplicate my New York layer, parent it to the North Pacific Ocean tracker, set my position to 0, 0, -25, make sure my orientation is set to 0 as well, and then change the text, and do the same thing for the South Pacific Ocean. And now let's watch that back and see how it looks. So that's really good. We've taken a really simple effect and turned it into something quite interesting. And of course, this isn't just limited to making documentaries about my life. After you've tracked the sphere effect, you can do anything with that 3D data in your animation. So I hope this tutorial's been helpful. I hope next time you need to animate something like a map, it's given you some ideas of different ways of doing things. Until next time, I'm Paul Murphy, and thanks for watching.